All right. Hey, folks. Welcome to the panel on the future of human-AI collaboration. I'm Aaron Halfaker, and today I'll be your chair. When we think about the future of productive work, it goes without question that AI will be important. From news feeds to text suggestions, AIs are playing a greater role in how we consume information, how we communicate, and how we work. In this panel, we'll be exploring questions about how we should build a future that brings the best of humans and AI together in collaboration. Note that this is intended not to be a prediction or a forecast. Instead, I invite the panelists to help us consider what direction and goals we should focus on in our work. First, we'll kick things off with a round of introductions and position statements, and then we'll dig into 5 exploratory questions that the other organizers and I have prepared for the panelists. I hope you're informed by the discussion. And with that, we'll kick things off with Jaime's introduction.
Thanks, Aaron. So my name is Jaime Teevan, and I'm Chief Scientist at Microsoft. So that means that I'm responsible for driving research-backed innovation in Microsoft's core products, such as Office and Windows and Teams. And not surprisingly, it also means that I think a lot about how AI is changing the way that people work. And one of the things that I think is interesting to reflect on is we sometimes make the mistake of thinking that AI is this magic secret sauce that we can just sprinkle onto existing work practices and make everything easier and better. But that's not really what it is. AI is just a new tool. It's a powerful tool, but it's a tool. And it's one that people are going to have to figure out how to work with. And here at Microsoft, we very much view it as our responsibility to ensure that it's a great tool. So what does that mean? To work effectively with AI, people are going to have to work a little bit differently. You know, the tools that we use, they shape what we do and they shape how we're able to do what we do. And people also care a lot about the tools that they work with. And they're going to want to, for example, be in charge of what an AI system learns versus just having the system learn without their actively being involved in it. And so that means the question of how to make AI, the tool, work well for us is really a deeply human question. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you all today talking about that topic.
So just hopping in here to say that Bill Stacey, who was originally planning to be on this panel, regretfully couldn't be with us today. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to highlight one of the things that Bill wanted us to focus on, which is the opportunity for transparency around AI. Regretfully, I don't think I'll be able to capture his thoughts for us, but maybe we can consider that as we answer the questions that we have. All right, Qian.
Hi, everyone. I am Qian Yang. I am an assistant professor at Cornell. My research area is human AI in action design, and mostly in medicine and in natural language generation. For today's panel, I would like to sort of start with a provocation. I envision a future of AI that makes AI as unremarkable as electricity. I envision a future where AI infuses our lives and societies in valuable ways, just like electricity. This means, I think, at least 2 things. One is AI is valuable in many different ways in all aspects of society, just like electricity, and we want to leverage that power. But on the other hand, electricity can be dangerous, but engineers and designers are able to create infrastructures, applications, and human interfaces that protect users and our different communities from these potential risks. And I hope that we can create a future where AI is just like electricity, where we, AI engineers and designers, can protect our users and societies from their risks as well. And I very much look forward to the discussion with everyone.
Thanks, Qian. And last but not least, Charles.
So thank you for that. I one of the great things about going last is that you get to agree with everything that everyone said, and said that that's exactly what you are going to say, and that you think that everything is interesting, and you get to pick fights if that's what you want to do. So let me just start by saying I'm Charles Isbell. I'm a professor and the Dean of the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. I've been living in the world of AI and machine learning for far longer than I'm willing to admit. And mostly I've been spending time thinking about decision making and thinking about what we call interactive artificial intelligence, this notion of building teams of human beings and intelligent agents, and building those intelligent agents where they're going to have to live with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other intelligent agents, only some of whom might be human. The conclusion that I've sort of come through over the years in thinking about this is that this notion of human AI collaboration, what we're talking about, really, in order to be successful, hinges on taking very seriously the phrase itself, taking very seriously the idea that the human matters, the AI matters, and that the collaboration itself matters. And what we have been doing wrong, in some sense, is that we have been thinking about it purely from the human's point of view, or we've been thinking purely about it as a notion of tool, rather than thinking about it as a kind of long-term and sort of ultimate partnership. And where we see this is issues of ethics, where we see this as negative impacts of what the tools we are building do and how they impact the rest of the world. And the only way, or a important way, which we're going to get around that and to make it better, and what I would hope to talk about here today, is in treating the entire pipeline as a significant and first-class citizen. That we have to think about the people who are at the end users. We have to think about the people who are going to be touched by this. We have to have them in the room at the very beginning, and we have to think about the whole system. Instead of doing what so many of us want to do, myself included, which is focus narrowly on the little bit of part where the data magically appears and my model magically appears on the outside, and there are no consequences to that. So if we can get past that, we will make huge strides forward in the future that I think we all want to have.
All right, great. Thanks, folks. And thank you for being so timely with your introductions and position statements. So next we're going to a set of questions. Again, as I mentioned in the introduction, I want you to focus on the should. You know, it's great to make predictions, but predictions are really hard. And I think that y'all have some really good points of views on should. Also consider responsibility, who has it, how that applies in these systems. And also, if you can, bring in any concrete examples that can help our audience understand what we're trying to get at when we talk about theoretical things that we might like. So the first question that I want to ask the panel is, how should we combine human agency with AI support so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? What should AI not do? What should people not do? And feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll start, and maybe I'll be more provocative than I necessarily need to be, and we can have a nice conversation about this. So I take issue with the premise of the question. So, you know, you're describing it as the human has agency and the AI is the support. But I think it's just as reasonable to talk about the AI having agency and the human having support. Not because I think that AI is this magical thing that we're going to create, but that it's important to think of these entities that we are creating, these tools that we are using, as ones that will exist in the world autonomously and will have impact. And that it's just as important for the human beings to see themselves as supporting the development of the tool as it moves through the world as it is to think of the tool as supporting us. I think that a mistake that we make sometimes, and it's very easy to make, is to think of ourselves as programming this system, maybe by example, or thinking about the way we develop AI with this language or that language, or by feeding it this piece of data or using this particular algorithm, so that the object at the end is a thing that's going to help us to solve a problem. But it's actually more interesting to think about it as a kind of idiot savant, something that is going to be excellently good at a thing, and our job is to help it to develop to be excellently good at that thing and tend to solve the problem in a way that we are not going to be able to solve the problem as a human being, to try to build something that will be interesting and good at doing that. And so I think the nature of the question, what it means to do better than the sum of your parts, is to remember that each of those parts are kind of independently important and capable of doing interesting things that perhaps the other parts are not. But that question of, is it a tool that is supporting us in solving the problem we care about, or are we trying to help it to get to the point where it is solving a particular problem that'll be useful for the group, is, I think, an important one. That we're not programming it, we are teaching it. And that's a fundamental difference between building an AI or building a machine learning system versus building a slightly faster sorting algorithm.
I think it's a fair point, although I would say it's ultimately still to be solving the problems that we care about. It's just a longer term view. It's how do we help the tool actually evolve in a way that is, going after what we're trying to accomplish. And, and you bring this up too, that the key to this question is that artificial intelligence is different from human intelligence. It's not like a dumb human. It's a thing that does something differently. And there are things that are impossible for people to do that AI can do. There's no way that we as people would look at every single document on the web and see if it's related to some query, but a search engine can do that really easily. And likewise, there are mistakes that AI is going to make that people wouldn't. There are things that AI can do that people can't. It's easy for me to come up with search queries that match a long-term need that I have or help move things forward, and search engines can't do that. And so one of the things that we really need to be doing is to think about the unique and complementary ways that AI solves problems and that people think about things. And then thinking, to your point, thinking then about how do we go in and lean in and maximize both of those things. So AI is good at finding patterns and it's good at applying them at scale. On the other hand, people are good at drawing connections, and we're good at critical thinking. We're good at seeing holes or where things don't work. AI is good at the things that people don't want to do, or that we don't want to have to do over and over again, or that are too dangerous for us to do. And I do think that there are great examples of where you actually do have things coming together to behave in better ways than we currently do. And and it certainly does reflect what you were saying, Charles, about both the system growing over time and the individuals learning how to participate in that interaction as well. So search engines are a great illustration of that, I think, of the opportunity to have AI do what it's good at and people do what it's good at. And we all have better access to information because of the different strengths that artificial and human intelligence bring to the table there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think search engine is such a great example for that kind of human AI complementarity. I also want to just add one sort of meta point. I think this conversation about what machines should do and what humans should do and how do we divide up the workload in our societies is a long conversation that has happened all over. I don't think the human AI collaboration question is that fundamentally different from human machine collaboration more broadly. But I think there is also this larger question about who should have this conversation. Should we, people who build AI or design AI systems, make that conversation, have that conversation and decide what AI should do? Should the end users have a say in whether there should be AI or not at all? When a patient goes to see a doctor, do they have a say in whether they want to go through a sort of sorting algorithm first or not? I think that sort of meta conversation is quite distinctive to the time we're living in, where there's a lot of debate on whether there's certain fields should have AI at all, and how should we divide up workload or divide up the role of human and AI in a sort of meta sense.
Fantastic. This is a wonderful segue to the next question. But first, I want to give the panel points on pulling in examples. I really appreciate how y'all talked about search, and that's great. I want to see more of that. So the next question is, who should decide what an AI learns, to the point that Qian was making? Who's responsible for the consequences? And how do we make the consequences beneficial, and who benefits?
Well, I guess I'll just start by saying pretty consistent to what I was saying earlier. I think end users and stakeholders and the broader publics hopefully will have more and more say in the kind of AI, especially AI in critical domains and public domains, that we hopefully we see more of that conversation and more participation in the shaping of AI.
So I think it's a really interesting question, who decides, and I think that the way you get to an answer to that is you realize that this is not a question to a point that was made earlier. This is not a question that is unique to AI. We have to ask these questions all the time. Who gets to decide how something gets built, to how it gets deployed? Those are big, large societal questions. The difference, I think the fundamental difference here is the same difference that computing brings to us, generally speaking, not just AI. It's scale. When the question before is, well, who gets to do this thing, who gets to use this, and you're talking on the order of the 10 people in the room or the people in the small village who are going to be impacted by it, you can have this kind of conversation among a group of people who have shared experiences, and you kind of understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. What we're seeing now, search engines are a great example of this because they touch everyone and everything, and they look at data from everyone and everything. You're now talking about the consequences of the systems that you build touching literally billions of people, which means that the answer to the question is the same. All of the people who are impacted, all of the stakeholders have to be a part of that conversation. It's just a more difficult conversation to have because you're not only talking about a billion people instead of 10, you're talking about a billion people with radically different experiences, radically different cultures, and radically different expectations. And somehow we have to figure out how to bring those people in to be a part of this conversation, because otherwise we build systems that make sense to the 4 people here, but they don't make sense to the 400,000 people who are going to actually be impacted by it. And I'll take an example that has sort of been in the community for a couple of years now. Something simple like Pulse, which is an amazing little piece of work that was out there that had this wonderful impact on the sort of wonderful ability to take pixelated things and create new things out of it. And yet, 5 minutes after it gets out in the wild, someone notices that it turns non-white people into white people. And there's an interesting question of how in the world would that have happened? And the answer is, it wasn't something that was intentional. It's just that the set of people in the room to whom it would have occurred that maybe we should look at this test case weren't in the room. And the consequences of this really simple thing is huge and problematic. And, it's a really big deal. And that's actually a pretty benign outcome for not having the right people in the room. So anyway, the answer to your question, I think, is it's the same as it is for any other piece of technology. Everybody who's going to be impacted by it. It's just that now that's a lot of everybody.
And I love what you're doing there, Charles, too, of thinking about what is making AI unique, or what brings us to consider new things, and scale is one. And another one, I'll actually harken back to a point you made for the first question that I think is important, is that people actually shape the system as they use it. So it means, as much as there are AI modelers or developers who are responsible for what the system is looking like, actually through our usage, the end user is responsible as well, but not always intentionally and not always in a way that's aware. And this is where having Bill Stacy here, perhaps with that point he was going to make around transparency, matters as well. AI systems learn towards an objective, right? And a lot of times that objective is not something that we control for. And, when we're, a great example of this is when we're thinking about optimizing for engagement, right? Then it drives weird behaviors, and, the system learns what engages me, and then I go engage with the system because it's engaging, and I reinforce that way of that interaction that the system creates, because I get outraged by ridiculous headlines, or I get interested in something that causes a lot of emotion, and then that causes the system. And so, I think the more we can start thinking about how to get intentional about actually the objectives that AI systems are working towards as well. So I think these are the ways that we can start thinking about how to what makes AI special, and how do we shape it in the world that we're existing in.
If I could just add one thing to that, I think that, it's easy for me to say this at this point in my life, but I think that it requires humility on the part of people like us, right? That, we think we know what the right answer is. We think we're doing the right thing, but of course we don't. We can't think through the consequences of, engagement is going to yield all of these dominoes are going to fall. And I just have to worry about engagement and, the sort of slavish attention to predictive accuracy, for example, without worrying about the consequences or even asking the question of whether that's the right thing that we should be maximizing. And the humility will make us better programmers, they'll make us better engineers, they'll make us better developers, and they'll lead to much better questions. It's better research. Everything about it is better if we remember that there's this larger set of people outside of our own experiences. But, that is hard, right? It is hard to answer the question of who's responsible and who gets to make the decision, because not only there's so many of them, but there are also so many of them who don't agree with me. And figuring out how to deal with that is, I think, a kind of fundamental process problem that we have to.
And that harkens to the point, Aaron, that you were making in just setting up the whole conversation too. That it's hard to predict the future, and I think there's this really important piece there, that it's hard to predict the future and it's hard to know where things are going, but it's also our responsibility, and we have to figure that out, because there are these unintended consequences in the things that we do. And I think you raise a great point there about, too, the importance of really thinking broadly and who do we bring into the room, and that's thinking about the people who are being impacted and the different stakeholders. It's thinking about, different disciplines and different ways of approaching problems and looking at problems as well.
Again, this is a wonderful segue into the next question, which is about process and how we build and maintain these kind of technologies. So how should we develop software products to be adapted to working with AI? Can agile programming or lean development methodologies be adapted to working with AI? What new maintenance concerns should we plan for? And what issues does AI create or solve with regard to software development or user experience?
Can I just say one thing you left out explicitly, which is the thing that I worry about, is how does debugging work? If you is the system wrong or is the system learning, and what does that even mean, and how would you ever know? And if we're living in a non-Markovian universe and the world is continually changing, how do you even know when you're done? The answer probably is you never are, but you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, so you have to deploy and just think that it basically never ends. You're just constantly updating and adapting, and that's okay. It's a part of the process. I think that I don't have a great answer to that, other than I believe that the software engineers and the programming languages people have a lot to tell the machine learning engineers about thinking about an entire system. It is a design problem, and it is a big thing that involves, from the very beginning, thinking about what the output is going to be. And I think that's quite difficult for some of us to do. But I will say one thing that I do think is at least, for me, a kind of interesting way of thinking about this, which is to remember that it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking about tool sets and skill sets and forgetting that what you actually care about is mindsets. And the real mindset here is to think about this sort of notion of constantly changing and adapting systems. And that has to be built in from the very beginning of how you design. And so then if you think about it that way, it's less about how do I program an AI, and it's more about what does it mean to have an adaptive system that is growing and programming itself. So the end result is not the machine learning model or the AI system that I am programming. It is that there is a set of things that lead to adaptive systems that will be solving a problem. So the AI, the machine learning, is the programming language or the programming mechanism or the specification, the way in which you specify what it is you're trying to accomplish. It is the tool that gets you. It's the means that gets you to the end. It's not the end, and that would help, especially if you think about it that way. Then you realize I should be talking about this in CS 101. I should be thinking about this in Data Science 101. I should be thinking about this much earlier on. It's not a thing that happens at the end after I've figured out how C# and Python work together or they don't.
I want to make 2 points here. One is sort of following up Charles' points about how AI changes debugging and changes software engineering in the first place. And from my perspective as an UX designer and researcher, I think AI absolutely changes UX design practices as well. Designers are good at thinking about what human needs are, what human agency problems, but we are now also dealing with these constantly evolving and adapting systems that adapt at a massive scale. How do we scale human empathy in our work? And how do we bring human considerations to bear in these constantly adaptive systems? I think these considerations absolutely change how UX designers work with engineers and work with modelers. And I also want to make a second point, which sort of connects to the conversation we had in the last question. In the last question, we talked about participation. We really want to bring in all kinds of communities that are impacted by AI, but we also want to deal with scale. And we want to deal with these constantly evolving systems. And the results of all these factors combined is that it's really difficult, if possible at all, to maintain a certain level of participatory design in the AI development and maintenance and the sort of constant debugging and evolving process. So how do we design sort of proxies or sort of fallback strategies to maintain certain level of participation while realizing with this awareness that it's very difficult to be fully participatory in the shaping of these systems. I think these are challenges that we're facing in AI development and maintenance as well.
Yeah, no, and building on that, AI infrastructure is inherently human, right? You can't have good AI without the people involved. It's a human problem, and it absolutely means that design and engineering and model development need to be tightly coupled, and the fact that it's deeply interaction based and that it evolves is hard. A lot of times we try to mock up AI systems by like Wizard of Oz approaches where you just have a person acting in the back, but that's the mistakes aren't the same. It's hard to see those mistakes. It's hard to see the externalities. It's hard to see the ways that it'll go wrong. One of the things I think we really need to do in the context of AI, one of the things that's interesting about AI is it's not deterministic. It's probabilistic. You don't know what's going to happen exactly. It's not going to behave in expected manners, and that's not a bug of the system. That's the way it works, right? And one of the things that I find useful for me is to think very much about how to learn from mistakes. And so a lot of times you'll be sitting in seeing product demos or new features that are about to ship, and it'll be amazing, right? Like it'll be like, oh, imagine you wanted this thing to happen and it all happens magically and it's awesome. And one of the things that I always do there is to ask them to show me when it fails. What happens when the system gets it wrong? And that's going to happen. That's like an inherent part of the system. And we need to be actively designing for the system to fail, and to not have those be opportunities for learning, opportunities for sharing knowledge, and also for people to teach the system. And also, they need to not cause disasters or big problems.
The failures are not failures if you do them right.
Right, exactly. Make them not failures.
I've actually got us a little bit of ahead of time, so I want to ask a little bit of a probe here, because it feels like we're pushing on, like on one side, you can develop systems that learn from mistakes, learn from interaction. And so you might be able to deal with, a bug by having the user show the system something or something like that. But on the other hand, we have this human infrastructure that maintains these AI systems and the software that they exist in. And so I wonder how you see like the trade-off, like, do we need both? Will we eventually develop technologies that just learn enough where we need less human infrastructure? Is the human infrastructure always going to be part of this?
I would hope so, because the whole point of the exercise is to improve the human condition, right? I mean, I don't know. This feels like, I like the question. I'm not dismissing the question, but this feels a lot like, does a tree fall in the forest and no one's there to hear it? Does it make a sound? And, if the AI is learning and there's no human being to benefit or be affected by it, does it really matter? And I think the answer is we're trying to solve human scale problems. We're trying to solve problems that are going to affect us and make things better. So I would hope that humans would have to be a part of the process, and the same forever, in exactly the same way that we have to be as human beings solve our own problems anyway. Or maybe I misunderstood the question, but I think that's fundamental and important. Or we don't matter anymore, and the AIs have gone off on their own, in which case I don't know how to answer that.
I would also think that human infrastructure would always be part of the AI, but then the question is, again, knowing that simply taking human into account through their data, through their interaction traces, that's not enough. That we have learned over time that if we simply think, oh, the data that each person contributes represents that person's desire, that's too simplistic and actually causes biases and other issues. So the question is really, upon this human infrastructure, what do we do? How do we take into account these inputs? And I think Jaime raises a really good point, like these systems learn. So if we can leverage these data inputs really well, we can actually really make good and make the system better. But I think there's also the other part that, like, for example, language models nowadays are becoming increasingly just gigantic. And if we simply assume that, oh, if this one user can correct that interaction by giving one more data point, and that can correct the issue of GPT-2, GPT-3, I think there's really a weight problem there, and we need to really try to balance these. And I think that's the more difficult question against the backdrop of that human infrastructure.
Great. Okay, so moving on to what I think is maybe the hardest question of this panel, depending on, well, maybe y'all have thought about it more than me. How should AI create or evolve jobs? Or how should this impact communities, companies, and individuals?
So I think this harkens back to the first question that we were talking about, where we need to think about what the unique value that people bring to the table. It is thinking about this, how do AI systems and people work together to get to good end goals. And then when you think about that, the impact of the future of what people contribute, it's really bringing out those aspects that are special about that. AI is essentially just pattern matching, right? Based on data, and you give it a bunch of examples and it figures out how to repeat them. But the system only learns the patterns we teach it. So that becomes like when you start thinking about what people with human intelligence do, our job is to figure out where those patterns might exist. An AI system can't learn, for example, that a problem might be solved well with imagery if it's a large language model that's only been trained on text, and it's up to us to make those connections. AI systems are lazy. They learn the very first pattern that they see. They only once they find a pattern that works, that's good enough, that's it, right? So, that I think a good canonical example there is thinking about training actually for hiring related to jobs. Like I have a large stack of resumes and I'm processing those resumes to figure out who I should interview. And I've trained it on existing resumes of software developers who are really good. And most software developers are male. So the system quickly learns that words like father or his indicate that this person might be a good software developer, and that's not accurate. And, you and I know that words like that aren't important for hiring a good software developer, but the system doesn't. And so that means that people's job is to challenge the system and ask questions, and we provide value by seeing the mistakes and the failures and working there, as we were just talking about, learning from those failures, making them opportunities to grow. I also think about AI systems create a push towards the normative by encouraging us to repeat patterns that we've seen before. The advances in language models are a great example here. Again, think about text auto-completion. Are we all going to start writing our emails exactly the same way? And to fight that push towards the normative, our job as people starts becoming, how do we do things differently? How do we see things in new ways? How do we do things that don't fit the pattern? And a thoughtful system can create space for us to do that, but it's, people's job to find those patterns.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a negative and a positive answer. So the negative answer is, the problem with AI is that they're computers. And the problem with computers is they do what we tell them to do. In fact, they do exactly what we tell them to do, far more efficiently than we can do it. And so a lot of what will continue to happen is we will teach things to do what we tell them to do, and then we will discover we meant to do something else, and we will constantly be finding the problem that we're actually trying to solve, and constantly trying to refine it and do something new. That's kind of the negative way of thinking about it. I think the positive way of putting it, if I can abuse a notion, Maslow's hierarchy, right? I tend to think of it as being infinite, right? As you get more and more freedom to think about more and more things, you think of more and more things to do. and those things to do are often positive. And so I think the future for humans and the future for work in a world where we really do automate away a lot of things is that it frees us up to worry about other things that are more interesting, which generates more problems, more interesting things to do, which allows us to automate those and then to do more and more and more and more. And we stop worrying about, I don't know, chronic diseases and start worrying instead about wellness and how to make people live longer and better and happier once we get past, the bottom of the pyramid. And I think that's going to be the kind of future, is it allows us in a positive world. And this sounds like I'm really, really optimistic about the world, and I kind of am, that if we do this right, it frees us up to find completely new problems that we simply don't have the time, or I don't know, we don't have the time and freedom to otherwise find. And I think that is great if we do it right. So it's positive. I don't think we run out of jobs.
So maybe this optimism, pessimism, and anything in between is good for this last question, which is, where would you like to see human AI collaboration in 10 years' time? And what do we need to do now to get there?
I really loved this question. And you wrote my position slides with this question in mind. I think AI, again, like on the positive side, on the optimistic side, I think AI is just like electricity. And like Jaime was saying, it's just a tool that helps people do things that they're already doing. So I think we have the potential, have the ability to craft systems and interfaces that form these good human AI collaborations and do tasks better. But on the other side, I think it's not to say electricity is simply a tool does not mean that electricity does not revolutionize societies and industries. Automating, like giving writing suggestions may be fine in email writing, but it really has already revolutionized news industry, journalism. So I think these larger scale questions are the challenges that we need to deal with, I think, in the next 10 years. And hopefully we can do it with that positive, with the optimistic side in hand as well.
Yeah, and I certainly, I think this notion, I think you're exactly right that, we want to get towards this positive future that Charles is outlining, and it's going to have impact in ways that we don't see. And it's so hard to imagine in 10 years how, like, the infrastructure that has changed because of our systems able to identify and apply patterns at scale and learn from interaction and learn from data to figure out new things. I imagine people will have become experts in teaching AI systems like we've been talking about, and not just through interaction or even through something simple like labeling data, like tagging photos on Facebook or that sort of thing, but by actually setting the system's goals and shaping the underlying models. I think we're going to see really significant changes when people are intentionally seeking out new knowledge and rewarded for finding different ways of looking at things, when they're sort of moving up to discover these new questions and that we need to answer. I think I get excited when I think about how we're going to enable the creation of rich personal views of the world too. What does it, right now, a lot of the models we're doing are, because data and actually large scale data is so important, we're really learning about societal things, but what does it mean to capture what a person has learned over the lifetime, or the wisdom of a family, or the intellectual property of a company? And so I think there's that ability is gonna change us just as fundamentally as electricity has changed things for us.
So by the way, I love the electricity metaphor for a lot of reasons, and because it's ubiquitous and because it feels unremarkable. But of course, it's magic. It's absolute magic, and it changes everything. I am sitting here. There's a light shining on me that makes it possible for you to see me. Otherwise, then it would be more difficult to do otherwise, because it's a cloudy day out here and all of that. And that is magic, right? It is magic. What I see in the future, what I want to see, is a kind of invisible ubiquity of AI that we don't even think of it as remarkable, even as it is, but that not at the scale, to take what Jaime said, not at the kind of just at the scale of everyone taken together, but at the scale of the very personal and the very individual. When I was a grad student 120, 30 years ago, shortly after they invented fire, I worked on this video project. I needed a $400,000 machine. It took me all night to build what turned out to be about 4 minutes of video, and it was fun. It was great. My daughter, when she was 11 years old, put together an award-winning 5-minute video with her phone and just her imagination. And the system was fixing audio levels for her automatically. It was focusing in the right place. And that doesn't take away from what she was doing. It was still it enabled her to be creative. And what I want to imagine as I sit here staring into 4 rectangles and talking to people who are in the future right now, that we recognize that we are living in an age of miracles, that it's a very personal age of miracles, and that we're able to do things that we otherwise would not have been able to do, and just accept it as the normal course of events so that we can free our minds to think about other things. So 10 years from now, I want to have an AI assistant living with me all the time, helping me in various ways and helping me to be better and a much more interesting person than I am now.
Wonderful. Thank you, folks, for a wonderful panel. That's all the time that we have. And thank you for everybody who attended.
Thank you.
Thank you.